Madam Speaker, I thank you. Madam Speaker, it is the English that say that you have not succeeded until your successor succeeds. And Madam Speaker, you performed exemplarily well in this committee of delegated legislation. And you're succeeding even further because your successor is actually doing an impressive job. Madam Speaker, I would like to start by congratulating the Committee on Delegated Legislation for such a good report that they bring to us. And we are convinced, Madam Speaker, we are convinced that these regulations ought to be annulled in their entirety. Madam Speaker, if these regulations were just offending some regulations or offending a policy or offending a legislation, maybe this House would have been a bit kinder. But these regulations are offending the supreme law, the Constitution. Madam Speaker, it is the Constitution that requires that there should be robust public participation. This House has spoken severally. The seat you're sitting on has pronounced itself severally that public participation cannot be seen to just be a PR exercise. Substantive public participation on these regulations did not happen. Not only did the public participation not happen, Madam Speaker, on an issue that affects so many students, so many parents, so many families, there was no demonstration that there had been a regulatory impact assessment done on these regulations. Madam Speaker, on that count, these regulations must be annulled. Madam Speaker, there is a lot happening in the education sector. And one key thing that has happened in the last few months is the Presidential Task Force, Madam Speaker. It is making proposals which would have found their ways in some of these regulations, Madam Speaker. The task force recommendations were blatantly ignored. They are totally ignored in these regulations. And Madam Speaker, that forms another basis for annulment of these regulations. Madam Speaker, there is a whole issue of the revocation of chartered to universities, Madam Speaker. That issue, Madam Speaker, denies the right that institutions, universities, and learning institutions do have in being able to enjoy the privileges that come with the charters that have been accorded to them. If they are revoked without due process, Madam Speaker, it is injurious to institutions, to their learners, and to the entire communities that are there, Madam Speaker. But Madam Speaker, finally, I would like to say that the premium that we have put on university education in this country ought to be rethought. Madam Speaker, we are a country that is developing. We ought to start thinking about our technical secondary schools, our technical universities, our technical polytechnics, Madam Speaker, so that every learner that goes through high school should not be willing to just take up a professional course in the name of a degree. The degrees that we have produced in this country, Madam Speaker, have become a burden on the carriers of these degrees. If we proliferated our education in such a way that some of our students take up the professional courses, others take up some technical courses, we will find that there will be use for the youth who end up in technical courses in the development of our country. But today, every learner wants to go to university and get a degree that will condemn them to tammacking for years on end after being accorded that degree. So, Madam Speaker, even as we are annulling these regulations, maybe it is a wake-up call for us to rethink the entire policy around how we train our population for the future and the development of our country. Madam Speaker, I stand to support the proposal by the committee to annul these regulations in their entirety. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The Honorable Julius Melly, member for Tinderet, but before you speak, allow me to recognize the following school.